So please welcome Buddy.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me all right? Lisa, thank you, and all of you who are interested in saffron. I'm happy to be here today and to talk a little bit about these years importing saffron from Spain and around the world. Before I get started talking about how I got to this moment 40 years ago, let me give you a little bit of a little background. I grew up in Port Arthur, Texas, on the Texas Gulf Coast near Louisiana. And I grew up in a clothing store family. Both my maternal grandfather and my father had successful clothing stores. So I had this business background that would come in handy years later. I went to college in Austin at UT, University of Texas, Austin, and I studied business and psychology. And I took a break after my second year and traveled for 20 months, starting in Europe and across the Middle East, overland all the way to India. And one of the first things that struck me when I came into Amritsar from Lahore, Pakistan, was a spice shop. And I've never seen anything close to that anywhere in the world before that, certainly not in the United States. You would walk in and there would be dozens and dozens and dozens of these burlap sacks, maybe 5 different kinds of turmeric and 10 kinds of mustard seed and 5 kinds of chili powders. And, you were instantly hit with all the visuals and the beautiful bright color and the fragrances. And, probably of all the cuisines in the world, India is most concentrated in the spice world, and you're making the complex dishes that they do. I also went to Kashmir during that time, and Kashmir was the first place that I came to my mind where saffron was being grown. When I came back to the United States from India, I went back to Austin, and some of my work there was cooking in restaurants, and some of it was working for 5 years in a tropicals greenhouse. So I had a little botany background and I had a cooking background when I moved to the Bay Area. And I'd been here for a while and had done various jobs and was looking for something to do. And I decided to throw a dinner party. And I had recently had a bouillabaisse at a French restaurant nearby and loved that dish and thought, well, that's what I'll prepare. And I started looking for saffron as it's a key ingredient in that dish. And I started in the East Bay and had trouble finding any, and then someone gave me a tip about O's Fine Foods in San Francisco in the Mission District. So I drove over and I parked and I found the store on Mission Street between 23rd and 24th. It was a store that dated back over 100 years, and the great-grandson of the founders was running it. And, not unlike the spice shop that I've ran into in India, or the many that I ran into in India, this store you walked in, and instead of spices in the big burlap sacks, there were dried beans and grains and that kind of thing. And then in jars around the perimeter of the shop, were jars of spices. And I went up and introduced myself to Merritt, the owner, and told him what I was looking for and what I was going to use it for. And he told me then that a big distributor had gone out of business and he was having trouble finding saffron. And it was just one of those light bulb moments. I turned to him and I said, well, I'll see if I can find you some. And the next day, I called up the Department of Foreign Agriculture in Washington, D.C., and I got the name of an importer in New York, and I called them, and I bought a couple of pounds of saffron. And they arrived to my home. I didn't have an office at that point, in these beautiful blue tins. And the exporting company was called Dafo Pajes. And Dafo Pajes was located in Figueres in northeastern Spain near Barcelona, which is a good distance from the saffron growing region, which is primarily on the La Mancha Plateau in central Spain. In any case, this saffron was new crop and it was beautiful. And I bought some glass vials and I had some labels printed and I got some jars for restaurant distributing. And I went around and started making a few contacts. I went back to Merritt at O's Fine Foods and sold him some for retail sale. And I went to the Rainbow Grocery, and I went to GB Ratto in downtown Oakland. I went to Las Karnak. And then I started also going to restaurants. I went to Chez Panisse, I went to the Beowulf, I went to the Broadway Terrace Cafe, I went to the 4th Street Grill, and most of the people in these kitchens, these chefs, didn't really know what beautiful, great saffron was. What they were getting was old and dry and expensive. And, for me to come in, in those days, of course, it's anything but that today, but then I was able to sell it for $30 an ounce. And they'd been paying way more than that, and they weren't getting anything near the quality that I was bringing them. And over the course of the next many months, I started building my clientele, and it made sense for me to go to Spain and make a direct connection. So the next thing I did was call the Spanish Foreign Trade and Commerce Division in New York, and they sent me a list of about 30 Spanish saffron exporters. And this was long before email, long before fax even. So I wrote physical letters to these 30 exporters. And I got about 7 letters back, and I thought that was sufficient to go ahead and book a trip. Saffron is a once-a-year crop. It shows up, and it's from a crocus flower. It grows very close to the ground. You're probably mostly interested or accustomed to crocuses that are winter crocuses, but this is an autumn crocus, Crocus sativa to be specific. And it usually starts to bloom in mid-October, but can start as late as the 1st of November. The harvest time is 2 to 3 weeks. So I booked my flight for that time, and I arrived in Madrid, about the middle of October. I booked a train to Albacete, Spain, which is on the La Mancha Plateau, about halfway between Madrid and Alicante on the east coast. It's kind of big sky country, very, very flat, not all that appealing, but perfect for growing saffron because it needs full sun. The next morning, I went to the offices of Antonio and Tomas and introduced myself. They knew I was coming, and they showed me around their offices. The two of them had been in business for many years. Tomas, who was now in his mid-50s, it started when he was 17 years old. And he clearly had a great passion for saffron. When he took me back to their storage room where they had these big wooden casks that were kind of like tea chests, and he opened them up and showed me the saffron. And you could tell that even after all these years of working in saffron, he was still very excited about it. And they took me to another room where they had 6 or 8 employees sitting around a long table packaging the saffron to be shipped to their clients. And in the afternoon, we got in Tomas's car, and we did what has been standard practice for this company for many, many years, at least in those days. At that time, Spain was growing 70% of the world crop. I'll tell you about how dramatically that changed in a little while. So we went to each little village, and the people, most of the people there were doing other work during the year, but for these 2 or 3 weeks, they would have a plot in their backyard, and they would get their nieces and nephews and neighbors to come and help them do the picking. And then it's dried, and they would separate the stigmas from the flowers, and then they would have to dry the saffron. And once it was dried, then it would be ready to sell. And at one of our stops, an older woman came out with her white plastic bag filled with saffron, maybe 1 or 2 kilograms. And Tomas, who was probably 3 or 4 feet away from the opening of this container, looked at it and he said, "I'm sorry, Senora, but I'll come back in a week. You need to dry this saffron a little more." Now, I wasn't sure what was going on with that. I didn't know how he could tell. Saffron, once it's picked, it needs to be dried. And once it's dried, it loses about 80% of its natural moisture content. For the best results, you want to dry it to about 8 to 11% moisture content. If it's wetter than that, say 14%, there's a chance of it molding down the road, and you'll lose it. What I didn't understand is how he could tell that difference from just a few feet away. But as I got to know him, I realized that he was perfect for this job, in that he understood saffron to such a great extent, and he loved it to such a great extent that the smallest detail was clear to him. He dropped me back off at my hotel that evening, and the next morning we got up at dawn. Saffron is fairly fragile to weather conditions. And so the practice is to show up in the fields, at first light and start picking all the flowers that came up overnight. Because if you get them quickly, then they can't be damaged by sun or rain or wind. While we were there, I asked if I could just do the work a little bit. Typically, they work backwards through the rows, and they have these big, beautiful baskets, which I can show you later. I have some here. And by 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, all the new flowers that came up overnight, have been picked. Then they go back to their home or their office, depending on the size of the operation, and sit around these big, long tables, and everybody joins in. And just like you would a honeysuckle flower, you snip out the back of the crocus flower, and the three little stigmas, which are connected, fall off into your hand. And so this is a ton of work to do. The picking's a ton of work, and separating the stigmas from the flowers is a lot of work. And that year that I was in Spain was just a couple years after Francisco Franco had died, and Spain became a much freer country. And the economics were changing. People were living a much freer, more interesting life. I think probably it was similar to what was happening in Berlin after the wall came down. People were very enthusiastic, very excited. The streets of Madrid were so interesting in those moments. People were stylishly dressed. The cafes stayed open late at night. There was music going into the wee hours of the morning. And the other thing that was happening was that a laborious thing like harvesting saffron was all of a sudden not that interesting to do the work for $4 or $5, $6 an hour in order to be able to compete on the world market. So over the next few years, less and less and less saffron was being grown in Spain. And as a result, for the demand and the amount of saffron available, prices started going up and up. The other largest producing country in the world has always been of Persian saffron. And in this moment, the Iranian government was very clever. They saw an opportunity. And so they started subsidizing saffron farms in the northeast part of the country, bordering on Afghanistan. And by 1990, Persian saffron was, the Iranians were growing about 90% of the world crop. And that's true today. And Spain is producing less than 5% of the crop. After I'd done the harvesting, I went back the next day to the commercial offices of Antonio and Senor Tomas, and I sat down with Senor Antonio, and we talked about the possibility of doing business together. And I liked what I'd seen in their offices, and I liked what I'd seen in the fields, and how Tomas worked with the people he was buying from. So it seemed clear to me that it would be great to work with this company. Senor Antonio said, well, if I was interested, I could let him know what size order I wanted, how much I wanted in bulk, how much I wanted in small packaging for retail sale. They would send it to me, and then I could wire the money into their account in 45 days. Now, this would never happen today. I didn't have to sign anything. This was a handshake deal. Granted, we'd been around me for a couple of days, and then maybe he had a sense that I was an honest guy and would pay my invoices, which I have now for over 40 years. I'm still doing business with this company. Antonio and Tomas have retired, but Antonio's son, who's also Antonio, is running the business. He's now in his mid-40s. He was 7 years old when I arrived in their offices that day, and he remembers me from that trip. This last January, he came to the West Coast to visit me and a couple of other of his clients, and he brought his partner, and he brought his office manager, and I took the three of them out for a nice lunch. And in the course of that conversation, I asked him if he was doing business like that with anybody else, and he said, no, that's long gone. He said everyone pays ahead of time, then we ship it to them. So things went very smoothly for quite a while. When it came time to wiring my payments to Spain, someone had told me about a small commercial branch of the Banco Central, which is a Spanish bank, in downtown San Francisco. And I found their offices in the financial district and went in and introduced myself and asked them if they could wire my payments for me. And it was it was very interesting. The bank manager there was named Eusebio Lajos. He was toward the end of his career. I think uh, giving him this particular position in San Francisco was a gift for his long years of work and travel around the world at different offices for the Banco Central. And, getting this position in beautiful San Francisco with a home in Pacific Heights, only 6 other employees to manage, it was kind of the cat's meow of bankers. And he was a wonderful guy. What was most interesting about this bank was I would often go in and spend an hour with them, and we would maybe take care of our business discussion within minutes, but we would talk about the arts, dancing, theater, gallery shows, film, books. It was those kinds of conversations. And, I must admit, I've never found an American banker that would indulge me in those other interests. I had one problem with the importing and the payments. Sometimes when I would make an order, the order would arrive here, and usually it was coming in by air freight. In those early days, it would come in on French Air into San Francisco, and I would have a broker to do the clearing for me, and I would go pick it up. But sometimes these shipments would arrive in 3 weeks, and sometimes they would arrive in 8 or 10 weeks. And as a small business with limited capital, that was a long amount of difference in time for me to be able to make sure that I had the money ready for the payment. I never liked to be late, and I never was. So Senor Lajos, when he heard about this problem, he said, well, we can solve that in an instant. I'll just open a line of credit for you. And again, this was not exactly just a handshake deal. He did bring out a promissory note for me to sign, which was 1 page long. And if any of you have had experience with lines of credit at banks, you know that these guarantees can sometimes be 30 or 40 pages and have lots of requirements. But this was as simple as it could be. And we set an amount for that first year. And he said, just, pay it off, and then we'll renew when you need to make another one. And that went on for maybe 10 years without any problems. It solved my problem. It was just great. In addition to Spain, the main producing regions around the world are Greece and Iran, Afghanistan, Morocco, and Kashmir. I was not able to buy Iranian saffron for very long. We put an embargo against that country. And sadly, it penalizes the saffron growers, a small, tiny little business, really. I think an effective embargo would be against, maybe the petroleum industry or banking, and not people growing saffron or pistachios or making rugs. But sadly, those things are all included. So in order to compensate for not having the, Iranian saffron was, perhaps the really top quality was equally good to the Spanish top quality, but about half the price. And I needed to find another saffron that could serve as a less costly one than the Spanish. I found a co-op in northwestern Greece that represented about 1,200 growers, and I started working with them. They had the extra benefit that a number of their growers were registering and having their crops certified as organic. And that's been able to supply my customers, like the Rainbow Grocery, that their customers want an organic product. I've also from time to time got saffron from Morocco. It grows in the Atlas Mountains. Talouin's the central city there. It's near Marrakesh. I quite like it, but and I have some this year. I was sent a sample, and I like to sample, and so I bought some. But it's been erratic over the years in terms of the price and the quality. I've never been able to really work with Kashmir. I thought I was close one time, but the political difficulties there make it almost impossible. I'm happy to talk with you about the differences in these different kinds of saffron, and there are differences, but I think I'll leave that and let, let's open this up for a little questions, should you have them.
Thank you, buddy. Fascinating description of your business journey. Yes, so if anybody has any questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat box or unmute yourself and ask Buddy directly. While we're waiting, I have a couple of questions, Buddy.
Sure.
Are you conversant in Spanish?
I spoke a little Spanish when I went to that first trip in Spain, but shortly after that, I knew that my Spanish needed to get better. Initially, I used a tutor, and then I took, 4 classes at Vista College in Berkeley, where I was introduced to Gabriela Pisano, who's Argentinian, but a wonderful teacher. Her husband is a psychologist, and they put his psychology together in a collaboration. And under her guidance, and later she offered to teach her favorite students in her home. So there were 6 of us that would go to Gabriela's, she had a little glass room in her home up near Tilden Park. And my Spanish improved greatly there. And I would say that it's adequate for doing business conversations. And if I'm speaking one-on-one with another Spanish speaker, I understand about 75% of what they're saying to me. But if there's a second Spanish speaker, it's Spanish is their native language, then my understanding drops off quickly. I can't really read, literature, Gabriel Garcia Marquez or something like that. Try, but it's too tough for me.
Yeah.
I will say, about 15 years ago, I went to Veracruz to buy vanilla, and it was a 17-day trip. And about the 10th day, a little miracle happened. I quit translating in my head. And, kind of like, riding a bicycle or something. And it was just, I just never suspected that could happen. So my fluency has probably dropped off because my only really opportunities are a few times a year when I'm speaking to Norma Gaia in Veracruz, or when I'm speaking to Antonio Sotos in Spain, I get to speak in Spanish. But and maybe if I pick up, and it wouldn't hurt me to take another course and get my fluency back.
Okay. Well, we have a lot of questions here. Tina asked, what hurdles did you have with U.S. Customs? And is it different importing foodstuffs than other goods?
Customs and the FDA are both steps that I have to go through. One of the problems that I had early, and that problem has gone away since I've shifted from using air cargo freight, was the Spanish inspectors would always take a little of it. So my shipments would arrive here, and they wouldn't take a lot, but maybe 5 or 10 grams, and that's not a small amount. And I'm pretty sure it was the Spanish inspectors, not U.S. Customs or FDA. The problem in the United States, and it's gotten really much worse during the COVID period because FDA and Customs have both been understaffed and overworked. Normally when it would come, when a shipment would arrive here, it could be pre-cleared. And if you're doing business with the same company for as many years as I have, then they generally just wave it through. So shipment would arrive here and maybe it would be available to me, the next day, at the outset 3 days. But during COVID, it sometimes has taken me 2 or 3 weeks to get something. Generally it goes into Los Angeles through DHL today, and it could take a few weeks to get cleared, which is a little frustrating, and I hope we get that solved pretty soon.
Okay. Let's see. There's a question. What are the differences between the saffrons of different countries?
Okay. Can we shift to my camera so that I can show the difference? Great. Okay. I'm going to show you two. The one I'm showing you right now is from Spain, and their practice there, the saffron threads are connected to the crocus flower by the style. The threads themselves are 3 stigmas, and if you snip it low enough where you include a little style, then the 3 threads stay together. And I'm going to.
Can you show us? Can you show us? Oh, there it is. Okay. Move a little bit more to your left, I think. No, the other way. The other way. There we go. There we go. Okay.
So you can see those are connected. The little white yellow part at the bottom is the
Uh-huh.
stalk that connects it to the flower. And so if you snip it where you include a little style, then these three stay together, and it gives it a little integrity that I like. Um, in Iran and in Afghanistan, if you see, can you see now just the three separated stigmas?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, their portion. So they cut this away from the style because the style really has no potency. And if you're getting all red saffron like this one, this happens to be from Afghanistan, but it's very similar to what's grown in Iran. Can you see, are those differences
Yes.
obvious?
Yeah. This one has no stigma.
That's right.
Okay.
And no style.
Or style, sorry.
These are just pure stigmas.
Okay.
And these are the ones that have the little yellow and white styles that you can see.
Okay.
I will say there's another big difference between, and here's Tomas, having bought a big pile of saffron. There's a big difference between how the saffron is dried. In Spain, they have a very unique process. They have these wooden hoops that have a screen mesh in the middle of them, kind of like a fruit drying rack. And so they'll put the saffron, recently harvested saffron, on top of the screen, and then they put the screen over a heat source. Can be gas, can be electric, and they let it dry. And they call that toasting. And the other saffrons from Greece and Morocco and Iran and Afghanistan and Kashmir, they either tumble dry it or they air dry it. And so they don't have that extra fragrance component that the Spanish saffron has. And, a lot of my chef customers are willing to pay the extra money for this saffron from Spain just for that fragrance component. Saffron has three things that it's, known for. It's coloring ability. You can see here's a little saffron rice that I made for the purposes of showing you. See it
beautiful.
Here, just in steeped in water.
Is that a tea?
It is.
Ah, okay.
Or you could use it just as a cooking liquid.
Uh-huh.
But and one of the things I wanted to say about preparing saffron, I think the biggest mistake that home chefs make is that they throw it into it shows off best on white rice. If you use brown rice or different or red rice or black rice, you're going to lose that color. Whereas if you use white rice, you get this just gorgeous color.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
But most, if white rice just takes about 20 minutes to cook. So if you just throw a few threads into the cooking water, I think there are a lot of people that haven't had the experience that you've had, Lisa, and they just will get a few splotches of color and wonder what the big deal is. So really it needs to be steeped. And if you're making a dish that you would use a fish stock or a chicken stock, then I would let it warm and steep in that stock, or just water, steep in water, for an hour or two ahead of time. 30 minutes is sufficient before you start cooking with it. But if you really want to infuse all of the power out of the saffron, then give it a little longer.
Okay. Somebody asked if she has some saffron that's about 10 years old. Is that too old to consider using?
I would, yeah. You could use it. I wouldn't use it, but I have access to fresh saffron. It's not going to have any fragrance. It'll have some coloring ability, so you can use it. I would use it up. I'd probably use it in chicken stock, making a little chicken soup or something like that, where you're. But I would use it quickly.
Okay.
Really, saffron is best in its whole form in terms of keeping it over time. Like most spices, once you've ground it into powder, it will lose its potency much more frequently because it's exposed to more air. In orange saffron, you want to keep it just like you would wine. You want to keep it in a cool, dark space, that's kind of in the 45 to 60 degree temperature.
Okay.
And you want, if you have it in a plastic Ziploc, then you want to squeeze all the air out. If you have it in a jar, then you want to, maybe take some paper towels and put them in the top so the saffron's not exposed to any more air than it needs to be.
Okay. And are the pictures here, are they from fields in Spain?
They are. And you see this particular field, they are long gone. This was maybe the second time I went to Spain. A field like this is probably 10 acres. And, now it's almost only little plots. Though Antonio that I worked with, they bought some land exclusively to grow for themselves because there wasn't, the small farmers weren't growing enough anymore. So they're growing about four acres right now themselves, and I'm getting mostly what they're growing.
Oh, really? Wow. And besides, so I guess in addition to the location of where saffron is grown, it sounds like the way it's processed has affects the flavor and the quality. Is that right?
I mean, certainly the difference in the fragrance, whether you're air drying or whether you're toasting it the way the Spaniards do. In terms of quality, dry is dry, and still needs to be dried to between 9 and 11% natural humidity. The biggest difference, like olive oil or like wine or like any food product, every country that's a producing country is going to have bad quality and mediocre quality and great quality. And if I'm working with someone new, then I'll make sure and get samples ahead of time. But I'm only interested in the top quality, and I'm willing to pay for it, and people know that about me. So when people, a frequent question is, what's the best saffron in the world? And, people are very nationalistic about their feelings about saffron. If you were to ask a Spaniard, no question that the La Mancha saffron is by far the best in the world. And if you were to ask a Persian friend of yours, without a doubt, there's no saffron, they wouldn't even consider another saffron anywhere close to what they're getting at home. Most of the Iranian people that I know, when they visit or when their family comes here to visit, they bring saffron on the plane.
And are there benefits to eating saffron health-wise?
It's high in riboflavin and B vitamins. And it's a mild euphoric. So if it's a regular part of your diet, or you drink a little saffron tea, then you'll feel a little better.
Okay. Any side effects from eating saffron?
No, but I would warn people about using too much in a given dish.
Okay.
It does have the ability, and when I first started cooking with it, I made the mistake of using too much one time because I had so much, and it turns a little medicinal tasting. So you can figure out yourself from just your own practice, what's the right amount.
Okay.
For me,
and is
right amount to get that beautiful color.
So how much saffron did you use for the rice?
Yeah, I cooked a cup of rice, and I used about a little less than 1/4 gram to get this color.
Okay. And is saffron considered an herb or spice?
Well, that's I've always thought of it as a spice.
Okay. And somebody asked, why do the inspectors?
Someone could argue the other side. It's just like people's, is or tomatoes, vegetables, or fruit. Argue both sides.
Okay. Somebody asked, why do the inspectors take 5 to 10 grams of the saffron from shipments? Is it for testing or personal benefit?
No, they were just taking it home with them.
Okay. And is saffron, you mentioned it was used for a dye as well as for food and flavor.
I've used it for a dye, just to because I like how beautiful it is. It does require mordants. I don't know if you know what that term is, but for people that do dyeing, it's what they also, you call a mordant a fixer. If you were to just, dye, say, a white linen shirt in a saffron bath, each time that you would wash it, it would start to fade out. And within a few washings, you'd have just a, pale, yellow shirt. So if you want to fix it for that bright color, if you want that bright color, then you need to get there. And I was coming back from Spain on one trip, and the person sitting next to me had worked for a North Carolina dye company. And he went back in his files and found for me what mordants to use. And unfortunately, you use an alum mordant and you use a chromium mordant. And I say unfortunately because chromium is pretty toxic. So you have to be really, really careful on how you would use it.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. And somebody asked, where's a reliable place to buy saffron in retail? How can you tell if you have a good product or not, or if it's fresh or not?
I can only be responsible for what I import and send out. In terms of retailers, if you're in the East Bay, Oaktown Spice Shop, Elsa Karnak, what was originally called a pasta shop, but is now called Market Hall, are retailing. And in San Francisco, Cheese Plus, Rainbow Grocery, and in the herb room in Santa Cruz, which is pretty close to you there. And if anyone wants to email me, either with something they wanted to ask that didn't get asked, or they want me to find some place that might be close to them where they can buy saffron, they're welcome to do that.
Okay, great. I'll follow up with everybody on emailing, giving your email address to everybody, as well as any other information that they may want to know about. You had some pictures there of a basket or something, or you have an actual basket?
You're right. So here you can see in the fields they're using these handmade baskets, and here at home they're dumping the saffron flowers from a handmade basket. So
and this is in the 80s.
This is in the 80s. That's
okay.
Right. And I brought a couple home with me. Here's one, and here's a smaller one. It's just so cute.
And is it still harvested that way these days?
It is.
Okay. All right. Is anybody else have any other questions? Oh, and so Tina asked, do they pick the whole blossom, then take it home and pull out the stigmas, the threads?
They do. So here's a picture of spent flowers. So where you don't see any red in this picture. That's because the stigmas had been removed. And this was just a big pile on the side of the road.
Oh, wow.
I took that photograph. So yes, they're picking the whole flower.
And the crocus is a perennial, right? So it just comes back every year. Is that correct?
They put new bulbs in every 3 or 4 years.
I see.
They do come back, but after about the 4th year, the yield is little enough that they want to replant with new bulbs.
Okay. And can we grow this crocus here in the Bay Area?
I have been growing my own little patch all these 40 years. So
really?
I grow between 100 and 200 bulbs. And, you have to understand this is ceremonial.
Yeah.
For my 150 bulbs, say, maybe I'm going to get 2/3 of a gram of saffron.
Okay. My gosh.
It's a long effort, but I will say I love going out in the early morning to see any new flowers came up overnight. It's a special time for me, and it's you just don't know the experience until you've had it. That you get surprised by a new flower, particularly if it's the first one, and you've been waiting, going out each morning, and then there they are. They come up.
Oh wow! And do you know what the growing zone is for this crocus?
It seems to be right about the 30th parallel. If you look across the globe, Spain, Morocco, Greece, Iran, Kashmir, they're all about there. And it's curious to me, so I think it could easily be grown here if it weren't for the cost of the land and the cost of the labor.
Okay.
And there is a new company up in Kelseyville that's decided to grow it, and they are growing it. I think you could look them up online. I
Oh,
haven't
wow.
seen them and don't know them well. I think, because of, the cost of California land and the cost of California labor, there's no way for them to could compete cost-wise,
Hmm.
with these other countries.
Okay.
But
And so do you dry the stigmas yourself?
excuse me?
Do you, when you harvest your own crocus, do you dry the stigmas?
I do. I'll
Okay.
typically take like a sheet of coffee filter paper.
Uh-huh.
If you ever used a Chemex, you can buy
Uh-huh.
filters in those big circles.
Yeah.
And I'll just lay mine out on that for and leave it there for about 3 days and just let it air dry.
Oh, okay. Okay. And you mentioned that it has to be like 11% moisture.
Right.
How did Antonio know that other woman, the woman that wanted to sell her
To be honest with
product?
you, it's a mystery to me how he knew at that distance that he didn't reach over and feel it.
Yeah,
You
but he knew.
in all these years, I've been working with saffron now 40 years. So, you would think that if it's an acquired skill, I would have it. But I think he just, had a visual instinct that was unique to him.
Okay. So somebody asked if the spent blossom is used for anything, or is it just
The
go to
saffron
waste?
itself that has fragrance, not the flower surrounding it. So, apparently, because if during harvest season, if you're driving through the La Mancha Plateau, where these little villages are, you'll see just these big piles of flowers on the side of the road. So they haven't figured out how to use them for anything.
Okay. Somebody asked, they were interested in your vanilla business as well, and they were wondering whether it could be propagated here.
No, I mean you can go to the conservatory in Golden Gate Park. They have a couple vanilla orchids there. Vanilla needs a very tropical place.
Okay. Okay. Is it hard to work with the FDA?
Yeah, if anybody wants to step up and do that for me, I'd be happy to let them turn it.
All right. And where can you buy the bulbs from? The crocus bulbs.
Right. I mean, most of them, most bulbs, period, are produced in Holland, and I'm buying my bulbs, from an East Coast bulb company that gets them from Holland. And I will buy them pretty soon now.
Oh, okay.
They'll, so I'll make my order now, but the bulbs won't arrive to them until late August, early September, and then they'll ship me my order, and I'll put them in the ground as soon as I can.
Okay.
So if I put those in, say, mid-September, then I could very well have flowers from these new bulbs, a month later.
Okay. Really? That quickly?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, exciting.
Oh, good to know. And have you ever heard of saffron from Tibet?
I haven't seen it firsthand, so there's rumor of it.
Okay.
But I don't have any firsthand experience with saffron from Tibet.
Okay. Does saffron have any herbal healing properties?
It's purported to, but I'm not somebody that could stand up for that. I don't have the education or the medical background.
Okay. All right.
I do want to take just 1 minute. These kinds of businesses don't sustain themselves for 40 years without the help of a lot of people. And, I will say, the people that are doing this arduous work, and it is really arduous work in the saffron fields, and and a supplier like Antonio and Tomas, and now their son Tomas Jr. Having trust is a big deal. And also, the bankers that I've worked with, and my friends and family, my father Maurice Sr., my brother Frank, my brother Phil, my friends who have encouraged me and helped me, been there to help me work through problems. None of this happens without that. And good
Yeah,
customers like you.
I guess it takes a village to help a small business.
Of course, corporations have their village, but if you're a sole proprietor, your village has to come from every direction.
Yes, and I think we need to support small businesses as much as possible these days.
Good, thank you. Me too. I agree with
All
that.
right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, buddy. Everybody
Bye.
have a great rest of your afternoon.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay. You're welcome. Thank you.